I'm Billy S, welcome to the channel. Last week we took a look at the bosses of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, but this week we're looking at the dungeons. Like Twilight Princess before this, I think Skyward Sword has some of the stronger 3D dungeon designs in the series. Some real elaborate set pieces, some visually distinct concepts, and some really fun puzzles with great item usage. But which dungeon is the best? It's time to find out. And if you're interested in other Zelda rankings, I have an entire playlist ranking every single mainline Zelda game's bosses and dungeons, with this video you're watching right now being the last of the series. So let's jump right in. All 7 dungeons in Skyward Sword, ranked. Let me know your favorite down below. At number 7, we have the Earth Temple, the second dungeon of the game, found atop the Elden Volcano. Now, despite being called the Earth Temple, it really feels like it should have been a Fire Temple, because a majority of the enemies are fire-themed, and the dungeon takes place in rooms filled to the brim with lava that you have to platform across. To the point where one of the major gimmicks involves you using a giant boulder to carefully balance and roll to cross the area. Now, this is actually the coolest part of the temple, as you get to use your navigation skills to work your way around to different platforms to collect chests, and midway there's this side path where you roll the ball down a narrow cavern and eventually combo it with the beetle item to open up a locked gate, which allows you to keep progressing. It's a lot of fun, and it gives this level a sort of circusy element. The dungeon item is the bomb bag, which you retrieve from a pair of Lizalfos who stole it from one of the Mogmas here. Luckily, he gifts it to you, and with your ability to carry bombs, you can blow up walls and other breakable items. I really like the idea that you can just pick up a bomb, slot it into the bag, and magically it doesn't explode. My favorite room though is this one, filled with giant ramps before the boss door, as you need to climb them carefully with limited stamina, recovering at alcoves while boulders rain down upon you. It's something out of Takeshi's Castle or Fall Guys, and it's perfection. The second variant, where you have to bomb open the alcove lest you get crushed by a wall of boulders, was also pretty neat, and ending with an Indiana Jones boulder chase to the boss door is a lovely cap to it all. But that's pretty much it. This is a very short temple, and I've already covered everything of interest. The rest of the dungeons in this game are all more expansive and have far more interesting gimmicks, on top of actually being themed correctly. That's what leaves the Earth Temple at number 7. At number 6, we have Skyview Temple, the first dungeon of the game. And while it's a similar length to the Earth Temple after it, Skyview Temple manages to feel more vast than it is by gating off more of the rooms with puzzles. You have the opening spiral staircase that leads to this hall with a new type of puzzle at the bottom, where you have to raise your sword aloft and spin it around to confuse the eyeball on the wall, which was cute, I have to say. The first 3 rooms are all about finding a way to raise the water level, as it's the only way to reach a vine wall that leads to the chest containing a small key. So you explore both side rooms to find a crystal within each, which eventually gets you where you need to go. Skulltulas being the primary enemy type was to be expected here, but they still make me very uncomfortable. Once you reach the central chamber, you can collect the beetle by fighting and defeating a Stalfos mini-boss who is actually quite fun in the early game. With 2 swords, you have to attack him from a vulnerable direction or he'll counterattack and harm you. Sure, you can parry his attacks, but only if you're used to the parry system. The rest of the dungeon sees you using the beetle to solve puzzles and collect treasures, flying it through holes and vast rooms to hit switches, and even collect a piece of heart. It's a really unique item and probably my favorite in Skyward Sword. We also fight a creepy Staldra, which is a Stalfos Hydra who can only be killed if all 3 heads are slashed at once. Such a unique premise for an enemy, I love it. Beyond that, we have some push block puzzles, a little navigation, and some tree climbing and vine swinging to reach the golden carving and the boss door. It just makes better use of its space and provides a more traditional dungeon experience for that first challenge in the game, though it does lose points for us having to revisit this dungeon later in the story, as we need to get water from the spring past the boss arena, which was just more tedious than anything else. But I still think Skyward Sword got off on a really good foot here. At number 5, we have the Sky Keep, the final dungeon of the game. But instead of being this evil lair like in every other mainline Zelda title, the Skykeep is instead a final test for Link to prove his worth at claiming the Triforce. And to do this, the dungeon had to create a unique system. When you enter, you find a single room with an exit to the right and a sliding tile puzzle, except it's not a puzzle at all. It's a mechanism that allows you to switch around the layout of the Skykeep itself. There are 8 rooms in total, including the one you start in, and the goal is to travel through every room, making it to different stations that allow you to move the rooms again so you can reach 3 Triforce spots. These are the locations for the Triforce of Courage, Wisdom, and Power, and you can collect them in any order you want, as long as you figure out a route that gets you to each pedestal. And in classic Zelda fashion, each room is based on a different dungeon from the game, complete with their own little obstacle courses you have to complete in order to progress. For example, the first room you have to go through is the Forest Chamber, where you do a lot of platforming with your arsenal of items, while fighting the forest-based enemies you encountered. The Lanayru room is based off the Pirate Fortress sub-area that has you delivering time stones throughout corridors to solve puzzles, while also avoiding the enemies you revive, with special mention going to this conveyor belt puzzle where the time stone moves along automatically and you have to fire at these targets that appear. The Fire Sanctuary room is based on the various lava platform puzzles of that dungeon, which admittedly ended up being my least favourite room in the Skykeep. It's just so slow waiting around for the next platform you need to create or leap to, and if you mess up, which you likely will multiple times, it's such a long wait to get back to where you were. By comparison, the second fire room was a lot more interesting, as you got to use the digging mitts to solve puzzles, and the beetle to shoot various crystals in the correct order to progress. We get a rematch with the Sand Ship mini-boss, a fantastic choice as that was one of the standouts of the game. The Triforce of Wisdom room sees us using time stones to solve a platforming puzzle to reach the correct platform, which had me stumped for a little while until I finally figured out the solution, fitting for the room based on Wisdom. And my last room for the Triforce of Courage had me fighting through hordes of enemies based around the lower half of the Ancient Cistern. This was a fun dungeon that really challenged me on everything I'd learned while also providing a great navigation puzzle that I know is kind of a fan favourite. And I agree, the Skykeep is one of the best final dungeons in the series. It does a trope of reusing previous area themes that I normally couldn't care for and absolutely nails it. But I just ended up preferring the other 4 more traditional dungeons, as they got to go so much more in-depth with all their puzzles and mechanics, whereas Skykeep gives you these bite-sized morsels that have you hankering for more. Kind of a gag that it's been hiding in Skyloft all this time though. The start of your journey is actually the end of your journey. Brilliant trope. At number 4, we have the Fire Sanctuary, the 6th dungeon of the game, found beyond the caverns atop Elden Volcano. And before I even assess the dungeon, can we all agree that this should have been called the Earth Sanctuary, and the Earth Temple should have been called the Fire Temple? Why, you ask? Well, the dungeon of the Fire Sanctuary is literally a pair of digging mitts that allow you to dig into the earth, with that being the primary focus of a majority of this dungeon's puzzles. Yes, it uses fire as well, but not to the same extent as the Earth Temple. I will die on this hill. So prior to playing Skyward Sword, I always assumed the Fire Sanctuary would suck. A game with 2 fire-themed dungeons already raised some brows, but finding out this dungeon doesn't even have a unique boss at the end really killed my interest. Only for me to play Skyward Sword and find myself so impressed with what the Fire Sanctuary brings to the table. Being greeted by this gorgeous OST upon entering with so many different textures and sounds left me ready to explore this ancient temple, and the puzzles didn't disappoint. Riding along lava platforms was a simple early gimmick that fit in pretty well, but the dungeon truly opens up with the digging mitts, as you effectively play these tunnel digging mini-games Bomberman style to progress, flipping switches, defeating tunnel worms, and at one point escaping from a dangerous lava flow. It's all just insanely well designed, and at no point did the gimmick feel tedious. The dungeon is also extremely vast, which is actually quite rare for Skyward Sword. But I like how once you reach the outside area for the first time, you can see your destination all the way in the distance, but have to wrap around the full facility to reach it. There's a good reason for backtracking, to defeat the fiery hand mini-bosses in the earlier rooms, which I really appreciate. The Mogma NPCs are all funny and worth saving from their little death traps, very Saw vibes. And even that leap of faith into the lava at the end of the dungeon sticks out. Something about jumping into somewhere hostile to progress just activates those neurons in the brain, you know? But what I love most of all is how detailed the environments are, to the point where you can see there is a story behind the Fire Sanctuary. This feels like it used to be a lived-in space with some sort of monastery or religious temple, and it feels like the precursor to what the fire temples would become in the future of the Zelda timeline. If only the upcoming dungeons weren't so strong, but I will say Fire Sanctuary is in contention for the best fire dungeon of the series. At number 3, we have the Lanayru mining facility, the third dungeon of the game, found in the center of the Lanayru Desert. An ancient workplace that connects to the Temple of Time, we need to traverse its rusted depths to reach Princess Zelda, and what starts as an unassuming sand dungeon becomes something so much more intriguing. You see, Skyward Sword uses the concept of time stones in the Lanayru province. These have the ability to turn back the time of an immediate area. Think changing the desert to grass, or in the case of the mining facility, repowering all the machinery in a given room, which creates the main gimmick of the dungeon. Almost every room has this element of the time stones where you'll need to activate them and either parkour through dangerous machinery and conveyor belts, or use special moving platforms to progress. We also get the Gust Bellows as our dungeon item, which is one of the more iconic one-off abilities in the franchise, though perhaps it's more popular for its appearance in Super Smash Bros., where its ability to keep players off stage shows a truly toxic side of its character. Here we use it to blow away sand piles and activate the red and blue platforms to get around. I really like this room specifically, where you have to navigate to some far off stairs, but spikes begin shooting from the floor. So you have to use the Gust Bellows to reveal where the spikes are coming from, thus finding a path forwards. The main room, as well, is this massive, expansive warehouse filled with tricky timestone puzzles as you constantly make your way back to it, while opening up shortcuts to get further into the facility. I really like the challenges where you have to follow a moving minecart with a timestone, killing any enemies and crossing platforms as you go. It is timed, technically an auto-scroll moment, but works so well with the gimmick of the dungeon. The rooms where you simply have to deal with conveyor belts and obstacles of that nature are also really fun, and bite-sized challenges to overcome. There are two of them, one that's pretty simple near the start of the level, and one that's a bit more complex right at the end, providing these nice bookended moments for the player. That last puzzle with the moving platforms as you try to bomb a series of statues was super memorable for me. The only thing keeping the mining facility down is that I think there's another dungeon in this game that uses the timestone mechanic in a more narratively interesting fashion. Let's get to it, shall we? At number 2, we have the Sand Ship, the 5th dungeon of the game, found in the depths of the Sand Sea. I think this dungeon easily takes the cake for the most original concept in 3D Zelda, with the Sand Sea itself being a fascinating play on the timestone mechanic. You explore a sandy expanse where a vast ocean once rested by using a timestone to bring the water back around you, and the Sand Ship is this large vessel you need to reclaim as part of your quest. You start in the present, with the sand ship long since abandoned. Your first challenge is to obtain the bow and arrow, which can only be found by defeating the mini-boss at the helm of the ship. A really interesting encounter where you swashbuckle him towards the edge of the arena, while the space behind you slowly gets tighter. It's a real emphasis of Skyward Sword's combat mechanics, and works perfectly here. You can explore the sand ship initially just looking for the small key to reach the mini-boss, but once you have the bow and arrow, you can strike the time stone atop the ship's mast, which brings it back to the past. Now all the monsters are alive, but all the machinery in the ship begins to work, and the crew that you've been sent to rescue are all brought back to life. The challenge after this becomes navigating the ship while activating different switches to bring the engines on. This allows you to sneak through the brig to reach the prisoners, which in turn allows you to reach the captain's quarters and eventually the boss key itself. I love that throughout the dungeon you have to find spots to fire at the time stone from underneath the floor, switching between past and present to suit your needs. It leads to a lot of genuinely puzzling design that has you really thinking about what you need to achieve and how you need to go about it. The dungeon, despite being set on a confined ship, is also somehow still incredibly large and detailed. You get very intimately aware of the ship's interior layout, so that by the time you're on the last few puzzles, you're blitzing through each hole to your next destination. Though I really like the parkour outside. Climbing up the sails and taking out bokoblins on my way to parts of the ship I couldn't reach before, it's very satisfying to pull off these moves. And then combined with a boss fight that actually uses the dungeon ship layout really well, it's a memorable experience through and through. They tried to recapture the sand ship's energy with the Wind Temple in Tears of the Kingdom, and I think the lesson we should learn here is that if you give a dungeon a solid theme and a unique setting, that goes a long way to making it one of the greats. I just wish it did a tad bit more with the bow outside of hitting the Time Stone crystal, as I do think the bow, despite being overused in the series, has a lot of versatile puzzle potential. At number 1, we have the Ancient Cistern, the 4th dungeon of the game, found at the back of Lake Floria, and it is the best in Skyward Sword. The Ancient Cistern is heavily based off of Buddhist ideologies, with the first half of the dungeon representing heaven, and the second half of the dungeon representing hell. Heaven is this peaceful, tranquil lake with water lotuses and a vibrant golden color scheme, complete with beautiful music and some fun puzzles to explore. While hell is this dark purple expanse with skulls and zombies beneath that hides the true nature of the world. You have to venture between the two layers as you explore, with you ultimately needing to find the boss key beneath the center of the large central elevator of the dungeon. And the journey to reach it is, oh my god, it's insane. I love that your first glimpse of the underworld is just a short stint through a side room before you're sucked back up and spat out in heaven to collect the whip. Then when you return later, you do a more in-depth platforming section with a ton of rotating platforms and walls you have to navigate through. In the upper half, it's a lot of using lotus lilies as platforms, or making tricky jumps with the whip, or climbing vine walls while circling the central room. But the standout moment of the dungeon comes when you find a small strand of thread in hell, and as you start climbing, a host of bokoblins begin scrambling after you. This is based off of the short story The Spider's Thread, with Link's adventure having direct parallels to your journey throughout the dungeon. Even the added touch of there being sculptures in the heaven portion of the cistern, and the upper half being designed to look like a lotus pond with Buddha at the center. We're just missing a giant lake of blood in hell, but instead we get a lake of purple poison instead, which I guess is close enough without going over the age rating. The puzzles here are really fun, but the platforming takes surprising center stage, giving us a real challenge despite the dungeon's inherent linearity. I really want the Zelda team to take more inspiration from old stories and tales because you can do so much with them to make them yours. And the Ancient Cistern does that and more, on top of having a gorgeous OST, stunning visuals, a solid enemy variety, fun puzzles, and topping it all off with the best boss fight in the game. It's such a departure from what we would call a traditional Zelda dungeon, and that's what makes it so special. And that's my list. Which Skyward Sword dungeon is your favourite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. My social medias are on screen now if you want to follow: Blue Sky, Twitch, Discord, lovely places. Shout out to my YouTube channel members who have supported me for another month, thank you so much. There's a shout out in the description at the end of this video, and you sometimes get access to some special Let's Plays as well. So I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.